Good afternoon, everyone. We are Carbonberg Energy, here at this Climate Change Summit to represent the interests of the coal, gas and energy industry. Here's some brief history about our company. Carbonberg Energy was founded by Norwegian businessman Eulen Gas von Carbonberg in 1976. While he initially sold air conditioners in his hometown, he eventually built the energy company we are today. We have a foothold in the gas, oil and coal energy industry, and our revenue totals to about $4 billion annually, making us one of the most profitable energy companies in the world and more than qualified to represent these industries today. We are also leaders in the development of alternative energy solutions. As a dirty energy company, the reality is that we are contributing to carbon emissions, and these emissions are undeniably causing significant changes in climate and sea levels around the world. And like our peers at Chevron, Shell and BP, we are committed to reducing our emissions. What we would like you all to understand, though, is that for a number of reasons, this will have to be a long-term process that cannot happen overnight, and we need the support of countries, not the unnecessary hindrance we are facing at this time. The question you're all burning to ask now would be, so just stop producing dirty energy? Unfortunately, this isn't possible for several reasons. Mining of fossil fuels is a key driver of several economies. According to a report from ICMM on the role of mining in all 214 national economies, only 2 of the 35 economies most dependent on mining are developed countries, South Korea and Australia. Out of the top 70, 63 of these countries are considered low income by the ICMM. In low and middle income countries, 60 to 90% of foreign investment is due to mining. The point of all these numbers is that dozens of economies rely on companies such as ourselves, and instantly cutting fossil fuel energy would cripple and in some cases completely destroy almost half of the world's economies. A move such as this would not just affect our profits and our shareholders, but also billions of people around the world. Stopping production would cause mass unemployment. Our company and many others employ tens of thousands of individuals who are specialists in this industry and have dedicated their lives to their work. Remove the industry, and you have a frightening number of people without work and no means to be employed elsewhere, as all their experience and qualifications would be for an industry that has effectively vanished. Again, this is further evidence that this is a global widespread issue, and we are not simply protecting our back pocket. During this summit, we ask that all countries consider what could be done about this unavoidable issue, as even while we gradually reduce our emissions and move away from dirty energy, we are putting individuals into unemployment every day. Companies such as ourselves simply wouldn't be able to cope with suddenly stopping dirty emissions, and we'd all go bankrupt. Now, this might seem like fantastic news in the fight against climate change, but sadly, it isn't that simple. We are under no obligation to stop our emissions due to our rights as a corporation in a free market. Companies such as ourselves are acting because we see that climate change is an issue we hold responsibility for and need to do something about. Not all companies feel the same way, and some organisations have invested tens of millions into finding ways to disprove climate change or shift the responsibility off themselves. Companies like Carbonberg Energy disappearing would just open up massive holes in the energy market for these dishonest and scandalous companies to take advantage of, and the fight against climate change would almost certainly be lost. A solution for managing companies such as ourselves that several countries have implemented or have tried to implement is a carbon tax. This solution has been proven to work. When Australia's government removed the carbon tax in 2014, carbon emissions from electricity use, which had been on a downward trend for years, shot up and undid a year of carbon reduction in just 5 months. There is the risk that countries could use this carbon tax as a way to seek personal financial gain, however, and taking advantage of the current crisis. An alternative we recommend to a carbon tax would be the UN, Greenpeace and other major countries around the world helping companies by subsidising renewable energy alternatives. Slapping a carbon tax on us with minimal warning means we have less money to invest in renewable energy alternatives such as solar, wind, geothermal and even nuclear energy, meaning that us and many other countries would be unable to move away from producing the very products a carbon tax would be punishing us for. Ultimately, this is not our decision. So, like BP, we plan for the future implementation of a carbon tax when creating all our projects. And major energy companies, including ourselves, support a price on carbon. However, subsidising renewable energy and making it cheaper than dirty energy for customers and companies should be the ultimate goal, and subsidising renewable energy, such as Australia's former solar rebate, should be the ultimate goal. As many of you may be aware, altering the climate artificially to help combat the symptoms of climate change, geoengineering, has recently been considered as an option to help combat climate change. Understandably, there have been concerns that geoengineering is simply a band-aid solution to climate change and merely reduces the symptoms of climate change without directly fixing them. It doesn't have to be a band-aid solution, and this is what we're going to briefly discuss. We're going to discuss two types of geoengineering: carbon dioxide reduction, CDR, and solar radiation management, SRM. CDR is simply reducing the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere through means such as algae farming, planting trees, increasing the carbon in soils, fertilizing the oceans, and capturing emissions from factories and power stations. SRM is reducing the amount of radiation from the sun through means such as whitening clouds and pumping sulfur into the stratosphere or mesosphere, away from the ozone layer. Implementing CDR at this point in time, we feel, should be an absolute given. For one, reforestation has to be something every country in the room considers in their policies. Perhaps a tree quota could be applied to landowners, or government councils could be forced to make sure land is being treated healthily by its proprietors. Research and resources need to be poured into these methods to ensure we are doing all we can to reduce carbon emissions. SRM is a solution worth discussing, but while it does reduce global warming, one of the major consequences of CO2 emissions, there are things it cannot fix, and in fact, SRM causes more problems than it solves. For example, it does not cool the poles at an equal rate than the tropics, so the tropics would have to be cooled to pre-industrial levels so that the North and South poles don't lose all their ice. SRM also reduces rainfall, doesn't do anything to help reduce ocean acidification, and would change the colour of the sky to white. There may be many other ways that SRM harms the planet that no one knows, simply because it just hasn't been researched or tested nearly as much as something this potentially dangerous should be before being considered. SRM is a last resort that should only be considered if all our other efforts fail and our very existence as a species is being threatened. As a world, we are spoilt for choice when it comes to renewable energy. We can't rely on a single type, however, for a multitude of reasons. We will discuss the pros and cons of the renewables that companies such as ourselves are interested in. Jack Lee Kendallington of our UK division will now tell you all about alternative and renewable energy solutions.
Thank you, Carl. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to start by talking about wind power. Wind power. Wind power is an extremely green source of energy. It emits no pollution, they produce 24/7 with minimal human supervision, and it is a never-ending supply. We cannot completely rely on wind energy as, while the turbines themselves are quite space efficient, we would need a frightening amount of space to fit all the turbines required. This picture here shows the amount of space Japan would need to power 20% of the country, and how much they would need to power the whole country on just wind power. It speaks for itself, really. Wind power is also a relatively high upfront cost, but the price isn't and shouldn't be a deterrent considering the trillions a year the energy industry makes. Hydropower. Like wind power, hydro is non-polluting, produces 24/7 and is a never-ending supply. Like wind power, however, it also has an expensive upfront cost, which isn't an issue as discussed before. There may be other environmental consequences to damming and changing the flow of water as well, but these issues have been easily managed in the past, and countries should really look to work with energy companies to build hydro plants as an alternative energy solution. Solar energy. Solar we feel is criminally underused, and solar rebates should be strongly considered by every country at this summit. Consumers have a responsibility to reduce their carbon footprint, and solar panels are a fantastic and logical way to do that. No surprises here, it's green, extremely flexible in size, and energy would be the least of our worries if we ran out of sunlight. Unfortunately, solar panels, particularly for consumers, are very expensive, and as said before, countries need to step up and help out every household and business to put some solar panels on their roofs. Solar power is not very space efficient, although in places like the deserts of Africa and Australia, space is certainly not an issue. Geothermal energy. Geothermal energy is using water to harness the intense heat and energy of the Earth's crust. Pipes are drilled deep into the Earth's crust and water is pumped down. The intense heat instantly boils the water and the resulting steam turns a turbine. Steam geysers can also be harvested, and this is even more straightforward, as no drilling or fuel is needed at all. There are limited areas where this type of energy can be used, however, so we encourage all countries to investigate if and where they can take advantage of their land. Space is not an issue, as geothermal power stations can actually be smaller than conventional ones. Nuclear power. Nuclear power is an interesting energy type. It produces an immense amount of energy, but still remains very eco-friendly. While powering the entire planet with nuclear energy would be nice, it is unfortunately not feasible at all. Derek Abbott of the University of Adelaide, Australia, made his analysis of what would happen if nuclear energy was scaled up to power the entire planet. These are his findings. 15,000 power plants would be needed worldwide, away from large populations, near a large body of water, away from fault lines and natural disaster-prone areas, and with 20.5 kilometers squared of land space needed. This is a total of 307,500 square kilometers over 15,000 plants, or this is the equivalent to the area of Poland. Nuclear plants need to be decommissioned every 50 years. Due to radiation wear, it takes 6 to 12 years to build a station and up to 2 decades to decommission one. In order to keep up with the global energy demands, a power station needs to be built and one decommissioned every day. There is still no way to properly dispose of nuclear waste. Nuclear plants produce barely any waste, however, this would change if we had 15,000 of them running at once. Uranium supplies would run out in 5 years. Uranium can be extracted from seawater, but after 30 years this would become economically impractical, as the amount of uranium needed would go up each time it was extracted. The price of building and maintaining these plants would be impossible to afford, even for energy companies like Carbonberg Energy. Based on the number of major nuclear accidents that could not have been possibly avoided, like Fukushima, Japan in 2011, since the beginning of nuclear power, if the number of plants around today were scaled up to this size, we would need to see a major nuclear accident happen every month. Keep in mind this is just talking about fission power plants. Nuclear fusion is another type of energy, although at this point in time it is even less feasible than the fission plants discussed in Abbott's report, as the technology isn't nearly ready for a large-scale energy production, and will require a large amount of money to get off the ground. This funding would be better spent towards alternative options as discussed in this presentation. Nuclear energy is an option, but at this point a limited one. I hope that during this presentation, Carl von Carbonberg and myself have been able to remove some of the stigma surrounding companies like ourselves, and prove to our esteemed colleagues that we are committed to solving the climate change issue through alternative energy. We also hope you understand that this will take time, and we will need the support of the international community. Thank you for your time, and we hope to do business with you, supporting your nations and businesses in your future energy solutions. Thank you.